Good afternoon. We will now commence with the special luncheon session on mainstreaming sustainability in business planning and practices. I request everyone to please take their seats and make sure their phones are on silent. Thank you. We are honored and privileged to have with us Mr. Ton Büchner, CEO and Chairman of the Board of Management and the Executive Committee at AkzoNobel. AkzoNobel has been a front-runner in business sustainability, having been ranked #1 again on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index this year. We also have on stage Dr. Leena Srivastava, Executive Director at TERI and Vice Chancellor at TERI University. Dr. Srivastava is a member of various executive committees of a number of organizations and advises management companies on sustainability. Ma'am, I request you to please welcome Mr. Büchner and our esteemed guests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me to be introducing Mr. Ton Büchner. He's been introduced already briefly, and I think he prefers to have a brief introduction, but I think he's had a very long innings in the oil and gas sector before, of course, his current position as President and Chief Executive Officer of AkzoNobel. And an engineer by training, he also has a Master's of Business Administration from IMD in Lausanne. And of course, he's got a tremendous amount of experience in several countries across the world. AkzoNobel itself is a leading global paints and coatings company. They have done a huge amount of work in the area of sustainability. And I don't think we can have a better person today to speak to us about this kind of transition to overall sustainability issues, and I think we will be hearing from him on how to mainstream sustainability in business planning and practices. We have taken the liberty of asking him to share with us his experience along this entire journey, right from stakeholder involvement to looking at incentive systems, regulatory issues, etc. I'm sure there is a tremendous amount that we can learn, and we are looking forward to you. I will not stand in your way. Thank you.
Thank you, Leena, and thank you, TERI, for inviting me to this very distinguished audience. It's an honor to speak here today for AkzoNobel about sustainability, something that we as an organization are so passionate about, and luckily not only at the level of the CEO, but very much in the hearts and minds of our strategy and the 50,000 people that we employ worldwide, including about 2,000 of them in India, here locally. The theme of this Leadership Summit for Sustainable Development is mainstreaming sustainability in business planning and practice. And you mentioned already earlier that we are the #1 in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and that's not because we were aiming at any kind of records or #1 positions. It was because we were behaving in a certain way, and based on our behavior, they decided as a result to put us on the #1 spot, not only this year, but also last year. And parts of the presentation I have today are a little bit trying to address how we got there. And I guess I can distinguish 3 phases, which I'll come back to later during the speech in more detail. The first phase was very much a phase of compliance, and that's, I think, a phase that most people start thinking with. The second phase was to go beyond compliance and to look at all of our own operations and see what we could do in terms of sustainable working ethics and working practices in our facilities. And then, as the third part, we looked at the entire value chain, because we realized that we can have a much bigger impact than our own footprint that we have in this world. Now, all of us know, and if we're really, really honest, we know that there is a lot less resources today that we can economically get out of the ground, and that the resource requirements are continuously mounting. Now, we all see the rise of the middle class as a very positive aspect in the development of various economies and the reduction of poverty. But if the future middle class and the people that are traveling in it are all going to be thinking with American desires of energy consumption, water consumption, and waste generation, we as a world, of course, will find ourselves in a difficulty, because this planet simply cannot sustain it. You can argue a lot about things like global warming and climate change because there is no cause and effect relationship that makes it easy to actually not argue with it. But what I think none of us can argue with is that we are, in the present way of working, on an unsustainable path when it comes to how we treat this world. We're actually using, in terms of resources today, with the present population, about 1.5 planets a year. That means this planet cannot regenerate what we actually use annually. And if we continue on the present basis, it will be about 2.5 planets if we go to about 9 billion people in 2050, as people like the World Business Council, and I heard that Peter Bucker presented here today, predicted here to be. And of course his vision is, how can we get these 9,000 people to live within the boundaries of one planet, knowing that if we continue on the present aspects, we're going to be using 2.5 planets. And needless to say, we all only have one. Now part of it, of course, is that some things are too cheap in this world. Water is quite cheap, energy is quite cheap, CO2 has no price, throwing waste on garbage belts is too cheap. And as a result, there is very often no economic drivers to put sustainability at the forefront of doing things. If we put those things at the right price, I think many people would change their behavior. But they're not, and they're not going to be in any fast way. The numbers are staggering. So if you hear about 9 billion people, if you hear about the way we are going to be using resources, it's very easy to point to governments to say they should do something about it before we do. It's very, very easy to point at the United States or to point at China and say, as long as they don't do anything, we shouldn't because we can't compete. It's very easy to point at competition and say, my competition doesn't do it, so that gives them an economic advantage in the market. Right? And that pointing and the staggering size of the issues at hand have made many individuals and many companies say, let's just wait and see where regulations are going. And if regulations don't move, why should I move? Because I am too small as an individual, as a company, as a CEO, as a line manager. I'm too small to make a difference. And what AkzoNobel's attitude is that's not true. We are a sizable company, but even we are small in respect to the size of today's world's issues at hand. But if we can generate the momentum and the inertia with our conviction that if we behave differently as organizations ourselves, independent of what governments tell us to do, independent of regulations, and truly looking at the parts of sustainability that can give us competitive advantages as well, then we can actually change this world from the company perspective. Because I think one thing we can all agree upon, to ask big conferences like Rio, like Copenhagen, like Doha, to solve the problem for us, we can wait a very, very long time. And by the time they found a solution, whichever one that may be, it probably fits in half of the countries in the world. And secondly, by the time we're there, we're probably already using 2 planets a year. And that would be the wrong thing to do. And that's why AkzoNobel has decided that it wants to be part of the solution, that it wants to drive to a behavior inside and outside of our organization within the boundaries that we can influence to make sure that we drive to a planet that makes us consume as a whole, as a society, less than 1 planet, also when we are 9 billion people together by the time we reach 2050. Now, things will change. Right? And the big things that will change is things when it comes to smart buildings, things when it talks to smart energy, things will have to change when it comes to smart mobility and transport, things will have to change when it comes to smart consumption. And of course, smart food, water and agriculture is another factor as well. These are 5 factors that all need significant change for this world to actually get within the boundaries of a planet's recoverable ability. And we as AkzoNobel play in 4 out of these 5 segments, right? Both in mobility and in buildings and infrastructure, in energy and in consumption goods. We actually support customers. And within the boundaries of what we actually can affect, we can make a difference. And if we get a collection of companies with us, on the one side in our supply chain, on the other side our customers, and customers do come to us and say, wow, you're number 1 in sustainability, teach us how you did that so we can be part of this. spreading that enthusiasm, spreading that passion has actually driven change in the areas that we as AkzoNobel can influence. And if people like yourselves in this room would have a similar drive, we are already affecting a tremendous amount of people. I think if I would add up the number of people that work for us collectively, and then add up all of the people that work for our suppliers collectively, we're not talking about small impact anymore. We're talking about big impact, not only on a local level, but also on an international level. Coming to one of the segments, buildings. Today, buildings contain about 40% of the world's carbon footprint. And we need to move to a future where houses, offices, and factories produce no carbon emissions, create more energy than they use, and are built from materials that are entirely recyclable. That's a big change, and that will only be done with innovation. And that's one of the reasons why AkzoNobel drives innovation very much towards sustainable solutions. If you look at mobility, right, it comes to getting around. About 94% of the energy for transport comes from fossil fuels. And if we want to change that, we need to innovate the whole concept of mobility to things that are far more energy efficient. We need to be 80 to 90% more energy efficient in our mobility, in our cars, planes, and automobiles and ships, to make sure that we can actually get to a sustainable planet. Right? So we should all be able to travel by low carbon transport if we look at what the future is all about. And again, that's all about innovation. And AkzoNobel has been at the cutting edge of innovation for the last 300 years. We're a company that has a large heritage and has always looked forward and said, we want to have the next 300 years as well. And we want to be successful not by being rigid, but by being extraordinarily flexible and drive our innovation spend to what we believe creates sustainable products manufactured in a sustainable way. We, as AkzoNobel, will need to become radically more energy efficient. And it's not about me standing here with some religious belief of saving the world. It's not about selling a pretty image of AkzoNobel because we're so nice in sustainability. This is about future-proofing our business. Water, CO2, energy, and waste will get a price at some point in time. And by changing our organization far in anticipation of these changes that will take place, and in some regions they'll take place faster than in others, that will be future-proofing our business. So it's not only out of pure belief, but it's also out of a true future thinking on what a business like ours needs and how seriously we take that. You can see by our position in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Right? So innovation is going to be a big part, and it is today a big part as well. But it's not easy to sell the sustainability story. Too many careers have been made in talking about sustainability but not acting upon it. Too many CEOs have talked about it but their organizations haven't followed. And that's been a big difference at AkzoNobel, which has been done by my predecessors, and I'm doing all effort to continue that power, to drive that conviction into the organization. Now, it's not easy. We're not making wind turbines. We're a chemical company where people say chemical company sustainability, that's like an odd combination. Still, we're number one because we look at it from a perspective of what is the impact that we can have on society. We don't make electric cars. I drive one personally, but we don't manufacture it. So all these pretty things that look sustainably, they really are not what we make. So we needed to take a different approach. Now, we also started with pure compliance, which is what I mentioned. Our really the attitude at the beginning when we started was, what are the regulations in our industry? How can we comply with these regulations? And how can we influence the regulations in such a way that they are positive for the industry and our consumers? And that's very much where I have heard many Indian companies are today. In around 2005, we actually moved and looked at our facilities worldwide. We have more than 200 factories worldwide. Of course, we have a lot of energy usage that we have, and we've been working on our footprint. Today, 30% of the energy that we use worldwide is based on renewable energy. We've really changed the energy efficiency of our facilities. We've put innovation money not only in sustainable products, but very much in energy savings, reduction of raw materials, and things that we can do to actually optimize efficiency. And here, sustainability, of course, becomes part of a business strategy. Business strategy is the sustainability strategy, and as opposed to some companies that have the sustainability strategy on the right and the business strategy on the left, we've basically said they need to overlap. If we talk to the employees, when we do one thing when it comes to sustainability, it should also have a business impact and a customer impact if it can be the case. But the second phase that we had was entirely driven by looking at what was inside the gate of AkzoNobel and to drive sustainability in terms of energy, water, waste, recyclability of our products, and driving efficiency and driving an optimization of raw material use within our facilities. And then later on, actually it was about 2 years ago, we started doing the assessment and said, but how big is AkzoNobel's true footprint if we take a cradle-to-grave approach? And then we realized that our part of that puzzle, taking it all the way from the raw material supplier down to the actual customer until he disposes of the products that contain our products as well, that we're actually close to 10%, which is almost nothing. Now, I've asked many of my colleague companies, is it actually a different picture for you? For most companies, their own footprint is between 10 and 20% of the entire footprint, cradle to grave. And thus, we realized we can have a far bigger impact on this world than just looking within our fence. So we've actually gone out and sat down with our supply base and have been very much driving our supply base to be part of the sustainability picture. Because the supply base is a factor 4 of our own footprint. And in some of the areas, our customers are a significant piece of the footprint as well. So we then decided, let's make our strategy one where we combine sustainability by saying sustainability is business, business is sustainability, and on the front end, we want to provide more value to our customers by using distinctly less, radically less resources when it comes to water, energy, and raw materials. And that's what we've been driving during the last couple of years, therewith having a much bigger impact on society than just looking inside our fence. Now, we've also then said, okay, let's get some serious target setting done for us as an organization that are for the entire value chain. So we've said our carbon emissions will be reduced by 25 to 30% per ton by 2020. Per ton that we produce, of course. Right? And we combine that, fewer resources in terms of energy and other aspects that drive CO2 emissions at AkzoNobel, with the fact that we want to create more value for customers by saying we want to have the products that give a distinct, clear, recognizable sustainability benefit to our customers to at least 20% of our revenue by 2020. So we've created our financial targets, plus on top of that, our sustainability targets, and we've driven those targets through the organization. Everybody has heard and seen both the CEO in AkzoNobel and its executive committee in their commitment for sustainability, but that's just words. What they needed to see was that we were actually taking actions that clearly showed that we're putting our money where our mouth is. We actually invested in significant energy-saving facilities where maybe at that moment in time people questioned whether that was an investment that they could economically optimize to the last dime. We actually truly changed suppliers. We moved from one supplier to another simply because the carbon emissions in producing the raw materials from one supplier were significantly different from other suppliers. We've set suppliers down and said, we want the same product at the same price, but at half the sustainable impact. And they, of course, screamed. But, of course, the result was, let's go and sit together and make it happen. And that discussion has been a great discussion because that goes throughout the entire organization. That's not the CEO talking to a supplier. That's many of our purchasing managers and engineers and factories talking to our suppliers, driving that sustainability philosophy in the organization, top to bottom. We have a sustainability council that's chaired by myself, the CEO, and is driving outside-in learning on sustainability and driving what we can do to set targets for the next time. We report our progress in a high level of transparency in our annual report. If you open up an annual report of AkzoNobel, you have a financial section and a sustainability section, and that sustainability section shows the improvement that we make over time. But the one thing where we've really made a difference is we've taken the top 600 executives of AkzoNobel and we made 30% of their long-term incentive, which is a significant part of the remuneration of the top 600 people, 30% of their long-term incentive is entirely and solely dependent on the sustainable behavior of the individual and their teams. Now, by putting it in the personal remuneration of the people, you move an organization. Suddenly the teams start moving. Suddenly they know what actually it means. We also, on top of that, have dashboards. One-page dashboards per business that clearly say, this is what we are today, this is where we want to go, that's where your remuneration is based on, that 30% of the long-term investment, and we're talking share remuneration for 600 people, and in the actual monetary cash remunerations of the people below it, it of course gets reflected, because guess what do these 600 people do? They put it in the personal targets of the people that work for them, otherwise they think they can't make it happen. And with that, we've really drawn that sustainable thinking into the organization overall, not just by talking philosophy, by CEOs making nice speeches like today, which I truly enjoy, but by actually having the organization move. And guess what? By the organization moving significantly, we actually reached that #1 position. So I'm sharing with you that story that we've done over here, and I can only encourage you 6 things that I would suggest if you say, now how do I do that in my place? The one thing is you need to determine the values in your organization today, and you need to determine how you can drive a proper sustainability message if you have that personal conviction, which I sincerely hope you have by sitting here, of course. But that you really say, what are the values today? What are the executives setting as examples? Because values are not what is on the posters on the wall. It is the decisions you take. It's the examples you set. It is, are you going left or right when it comes to a sustainability versus growth or economics discussion, which it very often isn't, but it very often is presented like that. You can't see sustainability as an add-on. It's not an advertising tool anymore. You don't distinguish yourself anymore by talking about sustainability. Everybody talks about sustainability. So you either live it, you either build it as part of your sustainable strategy and your business strategy, because just using it advertising, just using it as nice projections into the community or your own employee base, you're basically a Me Too part of it, and you're not really making the changes. There is no gain anymore by just talking about it and not actually making it part of your strategy. You need to combine a top-down and a bottom-up approach. That's the third part I would certainly drive in the organization. You can't just do it as a CEO sitting on the top driving speeches. You need to truly make sure that you create the conviction in different layers of your organization, select your management teams accordingly, and allow the liberty for the people on the ground to actually come up with bottom-up initiatives that drive sustainability as well, and reward that, because that is the best examples that you can set when you want to drive a certain thing, including sustainability. And sustainability is no different from other initiatives that you may drive. Initially, you have to focus at quick wins. And the quick wins generally are those that truly have a monetary benefit as well. Large drives for efficiency, everybody understands. They don't put it always under the sustainability piece, but they understand it. Now, significant drives of products that have a measurable, positive, sustainable impact on your customers is a visible thing that your employees will recognize. When we started supplying coatings to ships that allowed ship owners to save up to 10% of their fuel bill, our employees started to say, wow, now we understand why they put their money in that type of innovation. When we changed our complete manufacturing principles inside the factories by putting a lot of innovation money on process innovation driven by lower energy use, higher flexibility, and lower waste, employees start recognizing it. Right? And in the end, it becomes a competitive advantage. So the combination of competitive advantages and sustainability have been very, very important, and those quick wins normally make an organization turn and create and share that conviction. Right? Examine your products and your raw material parts, because a very, very large part of your footprint as a value chain that you're in is probably on your supply chain. So look at the way you build things. Look at the things you buy. Look at the complexity of it. Look at the supply chains of your suppliers. And basically sometimes set an example and say, I really want the one that has the lowest footprint, and set that example to the community around you. And the last one is work very much with the local communities that you're present in to build that capacity and capability to enhance the social aspects of your sustainable business strategy. Now, to wrap it up, and I think I'm already exceeding my time, but the world I guess, is on an unsustainable path. And even if you argue with climate change, you cannot argue with the fact that we're seriously using more than we can regenerate as a planet. And we have to change to become sustainable. And we as AkzoNobel have driven that in 3 phases. And I guess one of the things I urge you to do is to not go through those 3 phases in the same way that we've done it in the last 15 years. You can actually leapfrog into the last phase. There are major benefits for your organizations. There is no dichotomy. I have rarely seen economics fight with sustainability. I always end up in this argument where people say, my competitor isn't doing it, so therefore they have an economic advantage. If you are an innovative company that drives true savings for your customers with the products that you introduce, there is no conflict. And I have rarely seen energy and efficiency drives, reduction of raw materials, taking out of complexity, introducing new, truly sustainable products to be in conflict with your competitive positions. For us, it's future-proofing our business. For us, it's driving what we want to be. And for us, it is creating that critical mass together with our supply base, together with people like yourselves, in saying, make that change, join us in this journey, and make absolutely sure that you're not only doing it on your own, but that you bring your whole employee base with you, your whole supply chain with you. And if we do that all together, this world will change. We cannot wait on the governments to force us. We cannot wait on water, energy, and other aspects to actually get a price that forces us. We can only do it on the basis of our conviction, on the basis of our passion, and by enticing our employees to make it happen. We don't think about this planet as becoming impossible to live on, which is why we're driving what we call Planet Possible, the positive aspects of if we drive change together with you, our suppliers and our employees, and we do it in large groups of companies, we can actually be far ahead of governments, far ahead of the next big conference that may be in some other pretty location, and actually on the ground, day by day, make this a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Büchner, for extremely inspiring talk and for sharing all your experiences with us. I think that's the need of the hour for all of us, which is to see how is it that we can learn from each other and how is it that we can, as you rightly said, leapfrog so that we are not going through the same kinds of learning experiences and we don't have the luxury of time to be able to go through that. So I think that was really wonderful. What we heard, of course, was about the very high levels of commitment also from your predecessors you mentioned, so it's been there, sustained over a period of time. It's obvious that AkzoNobel has sustainability in its heart. The question, of course, is how did you get it in there and implant it so strongly, and I hope we can come back to that. There's a continuity, there's a culture that has been developed within the organization of sustainability, which was extremely interesting. There was an alignment that you were able to bring about amongst the various stakeholders, and of course is the whole issue of were the shareholders of AkzoNobel a very special lot of people. I think there are a number of questions that do come to mind, more learnings that we would like to get from you, but we are short on time, so let me turn to the audience and see if any of you would like to ask questions of Mr. Büchner. Yes, please. And then we'll have the lady at the back.
Truly inspiring talk, definitely, very, really excellent. Could you, and this is not confidential, highlight 30% incentive scheme which you give to 600 employees? I mean, how does that work? I'm truly interested to know that. That would be something very easy.
Yeah, that piece of our behavior, that step that we made, raised a lot of eyebrows. Right? Because we had a lot of shareholders that said, hold on, this has to be total shareholder return. How can you put something else in another topic? Right? And we basically said, this is about the future of AkzoNobel. This is about the future of our industry. Now, the way it works is we have a base salary for people. We have a cash bonus for people, certainly that top 600, not for all 50,000. So there is a base salary, a cash bonus, and then there is a share-based incentive scheme, which is a 3-year rolling. So your salary you get monthly, your bonus is an annual rolling bonus, and then the long-term incentive scheme is a share-based payment on the basis of the achievement of a 3-year goal. And in that last share-based payment, we've basically blocked 30% out of it and said, the best international measurement of how sustainable we behave as a company, not just report, but actually behave, for lack of anything better, has been the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So that is the one that we've taken as one of the components in the KPIs. And for many others, there's things like safety and other aspects of sustainability in there. But it is the long-term, the share-based 3-year rolling incentive program that also, in our eyes, was the proper way to do it, because annually you can optimize something sustainably. But to do it sustained over a 3-year period and then 3-year rolling, you need to actually think about a longer-term horizon when you drive sustainability. And that's why we did it in the LTI and not in the STI. And the LTI, the higher you get in the organization, becomes a very significant part of the remuneration.
Yes, the lady at the back.
Good afternoon, sir. I have a couple of questions. My first question is, what brought about this change in mindset at AkzoNobel, this whole sustainability agenda and the drive? There must have been some catalyzing factor or a trigger. So I would like to understand that. And my second question is, you mentioned that you've worked with your suppliers in the sustainability area to help them to work with them to improve their sustainability performance. Have you also tried to work with your customers and influence their sustainability strategy, performance and behavior?
Well, thank you for the two questions. What were triggering events? And I think they've been events that are probably not even specific to AkzoNobel so much. One part is Europe as a region. Europe has found itself in the past already, and even more so today, with three things that are not necessarily a positive thing in terms of competitiveness of Europe. One is that it almost has no energy resources, so it has to import all energy. Secondly, it almost doesn't have any real raw material resources. So a lot of the very rare raw material, Europe has almost none of it, so it has to import all of that. It has basically an energy cost, as I mentioned, that is a high energy cost compared to the United States with shale gas right now, Middle East and other areas. And it has an inflexible and relatively expensive labor force. So then you scratch your head and you go, wow, what is my competitive advantage as a region? And what Europe started to develop very quickly was, well, one of our competitive advantages is to use as little as possible of all of it, and to have the highest possible productivity when it comes to labor. Otherwise, we can't compete in this world where people have either cheaper energy or cheaper labor or anything of raw materials that Europe doesn't have. And of course, having almost everything at the expensive and inflexible side drove Europe as a whole to be ahead of the rest of the pack, out of necessity, more so than out of religion, if I may call it that way. Right? For AkzoNobel, I guess you had a second aspect, which is the chemical industry did not necessarily have a positive image. And that was because it was a high energy user. It very often dealt with toxic products. People forget that the chemical industry is at the start of almost every other industry, but they only looked at the isolated chemical industry part. And we felt that one of the things that we should do as an organization is to drive responsible behavior as a differentiating factor in the societies that we live in. And then it very much was driven by personal convictions of the CEOs and the management teams that we had. To your second question, it's interesting, we do it with both, right? Now, of course, we are a very large buyer of things, and therefore you have a slightly higher leverage when it comes to actually saying, hey, I am changing supplier because of CO2 exhaust of the stuff we buy or other aspects of efficiency. With customers, we find a different dynamics taking place. We have customers coming to us that say, wow, you're number one in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. We've actually tried to get into that place and we can't manage. We certainly don't get into the top 10, so please come and teach us. Right? So we've actually been with customers going through, in a much more elaborate way than I've done today, all the efforts we've done over an extended period to get us to the place where we are today. But we do it more based on requests, whereas on the other side, we have a little bit more forcefulness that we can apply.
One last question if anybody has, and then I will request, I hope that you will be joining us for lunch and that you would be willing to meet a few people. As you're eating, please do give him a chance to have his meal. We'll take this last question over here.
Hello sir, I am Shantanu Sakpathy from CLP India, and my question is, means as you have gone up in the ladder, which aspects of the sustainability like environment, economic and social have scored you the highest? And my second question is, now you are one of the world's benchmark. So how you are means helping the other peer industries in your domain to multiply your practices, means how you are creating the multiplying effect? Thank you.
You refer to the three aspects in the way the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is built up, whether it is people, profits, and planets. And we have scored on all three relatively high, otherwise you can't end up being number one. But we have in sub-aspects on all of these three differences in scores, right? So without going into the details, it's nice to see where you actually are not on the benchmark, even though you are number one. Because we're clearly not number one in every single aspect of all of these three core components and the underlying multiple other ones. So overall, we still have a long way to go. And the interesting part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index is that everybody's moving. So if we would just stay still today, we would definitely not be number one next year anymore. You can only continue to be number one by moving faster than the pack, actually to moving faster than the fastest person in the pack. And that's what our objective is to continue to do. Now your second question was? The multiplier effect. Well, basically, as I mentioned, I always say, I can be a big preacher, right? If I, as AkzoNobel, would talk about agriculture and food, it would be quite difficult because we as an organization don't have a stake in that business. I have a much higher impact when I focus the stake in the end user segments that I'm in, buildings and infrastructure, transport, consumer goods, and the industrial side. If I do it with my supply base and my customer base, and if I team up with companies that have the same philosophy but address multiple other segments. So we try to stay in the areas where we have credibility and where therefore we can drive change, as opposed to becoming a global preacher. Right? Now that's different. Some people are far more global preachers, and we need them too. But when it comes to our pragmatic approach of doing business, we actually try to keep our feet on the ground and look at our sphere of influence and not step too far out of it when we try to drive change.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I will not be able to take any more questions. I think what Mr. Büchner has proven to us is, and AkzoNobel, that it can be done, and it can be done, I presume, with more benefits than costs, because you continue to remain committed to it. And we have learned the way that AkzoNobel has achieved the position that they have in the sustainability arena. And I think it is important for all of us to look internally at our own context and potential and options and define our own models. I'm sure you'll agree with that. And as I said, I'm going to request you to be open to receiving a few questions as we go along. But on behalf of all of us, very hearty thank you for joining us and for being so open in sharing your experiences and also the structures that you have put in place. Please, let's have a round of applause. And please do join us. Thank you very much.